got Noah coming in from Texas, and Noah says he's got a question. I'm African American. I have a question. Why do so many African Americans hold their beliefs so close? So, welcome in, Noah. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I don't really know.
Hi,
cultures and beliefs.
Love the show, by the way.
Or why people believe strongly.
You guys hear me?
Yeah, we're with you.
I'm trying to figure out why people believe things strongly too, man. So I'm with you.
I grew up Baptist, and I kind of stopped believing in all of it. But I kind of did my research on the history of Christianity and how it came to be, and I'm just wondering why so many people in my community still believe in it. And I don't know if it's because they don't know the history of it, or if it's like an inherited thing, or is it they don't want to be without a lack of faith? I don't know.
Well, I've got a theory. I've got a couple of theories, but in history, there's a lot of talk about in the ancient Near East about how some cultures were able to preserve their culture so well. For example, despite the horrific persecution that the Jews underwent, they were able to hold on to their cultural identity for a long period of time. It seems to defy what you would expect logically, but a lot of historians would suggest that actually these tight-knit communities that do receive high levels of persecution, the thing that allows them to survive is digging into that shared cultural identity and using it to give them strength to get through those persecutions. And I would say this is very true of other cultures that were persecuted. So when we talk about what happened to the African Americans, both in the slave trade by the early traders from the Near East, from the Orient, and then eventually the Atlantic slave trade as well, and then leading into civil rights. They've got the early slave trade started in the 7th century CE and went on all the way until the civil rights era, essentially, and it's still going on in some places. But so in order to survive that level of persecution for so long, you have to dig down deep and hold on to the pieces of your culture. Now, the problem that we have is things sneak into the culture eventually. And some of the things that tend to sneak in are religious concepts because they get forced on the people groups. And so what we'll find is that people still have the instinct throughout their lives to preserve the culture, but they don't realize that their culture along the way has been picking up things that were never part of the original culture to begin with, but they still have that instinct to hold on to it. So I think people just naturally have the instinct to do self-preservation, especially in their religious beliefs. And that, they're not likely to let go of that until they're faced with some sort of overwhelming situation that would cause them to look back and say, hey, all that stuff that happened over there, I don't think I actually need to hold on to it. I don't even think half of it is true, but people are pretty reluctant to do that. Sorry if that was a convoluted answer.
So
I'm glad you're on our team. Is what I want.
So how do I have this conversation with people in my community without trying to make them feel attacked, or I can make them realize that what they're believing in was never really their religion to be practiced in the beginning. It was something that was kind of forced on them or put through, violent test of submission.
That's hard. My method for dialoguing with people that I would classify as wanting to move them away from a toxic belief system is, rather than trying to say, hey, here's what I think, or here's what I think you should think, just ask them questions about their worldview. So there's been some really interesting studies in psychology and suggest that when people arrive at the conclusion because they're providing the answer, not somebody providing it for them, they're more likely to accept it. So when you ask good questions that you can elicit answers from them, like they've done the the thinking on. Like, here's the question, I came up with the answer. Well, whatever that answer is, they're more likely to accept the answer. Whereas if I just said, well, I think the answer is this and you should believe it too, they're not really going to buy into it. So learn to ask really good questions to cause your friends and your family to think critically about things they probably never thought about. Because then when they arrive at that answer, they're more likely to be like, oh shit, I never thought about that before, rather than getting all defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, that's great.
That's
I'm just sitting here, I'm like, man, this is some fucking great advice. This is good.
I would say this, though, when it comes to your friends and family, you know, I don't turn to the Bible for advice very often, but there is a really good line in the Bible where Jesus says, you know, even a prophet's not honored in his hometown. And it kind of bites onto a really interesting piece of psychology, which is that when it's people you know, your friends and your family, people that are close to you, you're less likely to take their advice seriously quite often, because you're like, hey, that asshole was eating worms when we were 5 years old. I'm not going to listen to him. So there's certainly, it can be difficult to convince your family members of things because like they know all your flaws already.
Yeah. I never thought about it that way. Man. So I have a lot to think about, honestly, from this, and see what I can do with it. But that's pretty much all I have for you guys.
Well, thanks for calling. I'm
glad you did.